So trying to navigate through this world where we are so bloody obsessed and addicted to our appearance, our weight, and the whole diet culture is just such a minefield. There's so much advice out there. It can feel pretty overwhelming to know how to start and what to do to try and combat these thoughts and feelings around food and the way you look. And this is especially the case if you're the one really struggling inside and finding yourself becoming more and more preoccupied by food and weight. It's tough. But the thing is, I want you to know that none of this is your fault, okay? It's society which is breeding these problems by constantly exposing us and manipulating us through messaging in advertisements and marketing, all based on the underlying premise that we need to change the way we look to be happy, successful, loved, attractive. It's making us believe that our self-worth is determined by our side, which makes me so angry and frustrated. So to try and filter out all of this noise, all of this overwhelming information out there, I want to just give you one key tip which will help you bring to your awareness whether or not you're beginning to develop issues with food and struggle with the way you look and your body image. One key thing, okay? But unfortunately, personally, I didn't have this awareness growing up. And I remember at just 16, I started my very first diet because I believed that for guys to like me and to find me attractive, I had to be skinnier. But unfortunately, this didn't work out in the way I'd hoped. And instead, I suffered for over 10 years with anorexia and bulimia. So I really cannot let this happen to you. We need to push back against diet culture and bring more attention to and awareness to our thoughts, our feelings, and emotions so we can kind of catch ourselves out before we go too far down that wrong path, if that makes sense. So what is this one key thing? How are we going to start catching ourselves out and bringing more awareness to our thoughts? I'm going to give you some examples of things that you could be thinking. So I can't eat that. I shouldn't eat that. I mustn't eat that. I can't eat after 7 in the evening. These foods are bad. These foods will make me fat, so I can't eat them. That meal's not low enough in calories, so I'm going to avoid it or swap it for something else. And I don't know what's in this meal, so I'm not going to eat it. Just let those sit with you, and I wonder if you can notice any patterns in those types of phrases. Now, the thing that they all have in common is a negativity bias towards food, okay? So what the hell is that? What is a negativity bias? So this is when we have a tendency to show a greater reaction and a response to things of a more negative nature, okay? And as a result, these things which are negative actually have a bigger impact on our mental state, obviously, compared to things which are neutral and positive, so they have much more of an effect. But again, I want to say this, is that some of this isn't your fault, okay? Our brains actually evolved to encourage us to focus more on the negatives than the positives. Because back in the day when we were hunter-gatherers, this was a survival instinct and was there to keep us safe and protect us from threats, okay? So that's why our brains are basically hardwired for negativity. So as we begin to build up this negativity towards food, there's another key thing here, that negativity and negative emotions, experiences, whatever it may be, our brains will actually store it much more easily than positive experiences, which sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? So we're more likely to register a negative experience with food rather than take in a happy, fun experience because of the way our brains have evolved, which just doesn't make any sense. You know, our brains are amazing things, but sometimes like this, it gets it totally wrong. So how do we break this negativity bias before this gets out of hand, before we find ourselves feeling more consumed, more controlled by food and our weight than ever before? So I want to talk about 3 steps to doing this, yeah? So number 1, we've briefly touched on it, and that is starting to become aware of what thoughts are going through your mind, okay, and how you're speaking to yourself. And start to recognize the types of thoughts and statements and words you're using, okay, which are leading you to form this negative way of being towards food. So who is running the show? Is it more negative thoughts and statements, or is it more positive? Which one has got the heavier weight to it? So once you start checking in with yourself and noticing how you're speaking, what I then would like you to do for step 2 is to write it down. So make a list and reflect back over your day and make a list of all the types of words and phrases that you use to talk to yourself around food, weight, body image, and exercise, that whole spectrum. And what I then want you to do is to get a highlighter, whatever color is best, and just highlight all the negative statements like before. The can'ts, I mustn't, the shouldn'ts, can'ts, mustn'ts, shouldn'ts. They're like the 3 things, yeah? So highlight all of those phrases that you typically use. Then what you do for step 3, we're going to start to try and replace these negative thoughts with something more positive. And this will take some practice. So this isn't an overnight thing. You know, practice makes permanent. We've got to kind of retrain your brain to a whole new way of thinking around food, so it realizes that there is no danger. There's nothing to be scared of. Food does not equal threat, so it doesn't need that negativity. So I know I'm a bit skeptical about this whole body positivity movement, especially if you've been struggling for such a long time like I did. So for me, it felt quite unrealistic and pretty much impossible to switch my thinking straight away from negative all the way to positive. But the thing is, we can do that. We can set ourselves words and thoughts and statements which are positive, and you know, like you think the things you should be saying. However, if your mind does not believe that statement, if it's not quite there yet, if it hasn't bought in, that positive statement is going to have no effect whatsoever. So it's kind of like we've got to get your mind's buy-in. So the best way I found to do this was on a scale. So we've got negative at one end. So that negative statement you have, you can first of all start to replace it with something slightly less negative. And then once that feels okay and your brain's like, yeah, all right, I feel all right with this, then you can replace it with a neutral statement. And then once that feels okay, you can shift that along to something slightly more positive, and then eventually shift that into the positive statement, like the end goal, the ultimate statement. But by doing it so gradually, this will enable your mind to have the time to readjust, recalibrate, rewire, and actually buy in to the thoughts that are basically going to help you break free of this trap. So for me, that felt a much more realistic and feasible way of making that transition. So just give that a try. And like I said, it's a case of trial and error to find what words suit you, what phrases sit well, and what feels right. So this is completely individualized and everybody is different. So don't worry if you try something and it doesn't feel right. Just try something else. This is like exploring your mind, how you're thinking, and the way it works. So just to recap, you can filter out all of that noise that is out there. Everything that's talking about how to spot if you've got an unhealthy relationship, how to build a healthy relationship, how to notice if you're developing issues, it can be filled with way too much. So what you can do to filter that all out is just focus on one key thing, okay? And this is the negativity bias, that tendency to react or respond in a negative way. And like I said before, this is not your fault. This is part of evolution of the human brain. So to break that negativity bias, you can follow those 3 steps I just went through. It's starting to pay more attention of the way you're talking to yourself and what is carrying the most weight, negative statements or positives. The second step is then to make a list of all the words you typically use and then highlight all the ones which are causing you problems and stirring up all those unwanted, fearful emotions which aren't helping you in the way you would like. And then pick the first statement to try and use the scale to edge and shift that thought towards a more positive one. But do this gradually, remember, because you've got to get your mind's buy-in. It's got to believe what you're saying. So you start from negative to slightly less negative, then to neutral, slightly more positive, and then positive. And then do this for all the different words, but take your time. This is not a race, okay? So hopefully that was helpful and gave you a bit more of a steer and a direction on how to actually deal with all these thoughts and feelings around food and weight and the way you look. Because I know you know deep down that it doesn't feel right and it's not fun to be living life from that place. Trust me, I know. I spent 15 years living like that, and I just do not want you to waste any more valuable time feeling the way you do if you're in that same place.